After the fire was out and the Romans broke through, the next day everyone was dead already. You know the story, right? Everybody probably knows the story of Masada. Everyone was dead. The Romans came in and said, who do we kill? We want to kill somebody. Okay, so we are on the next to last chapter of history. Chapter 10 is the next to last chapter of history. We're going to finish it up here in just 15 minutes probably. We will get Masada destroyed, which is the last Jewish holdout in Judea. And then the Romans pretty much took over. They pretty much had the world by that point. Okay, and then we'll jump into, a little bit later on today, we'll jump into chapter 11, which is, we're going to go from Judea, over to Rome. We'll talk about Roman history, the monarchy a little bit. We'll talk about the Republic, different phases of the Republic. Then we'll talk about the Empire, and then how the Roman Empire broke up into a Western Empire and an Eastern Empire, and how those two empires fell over time. Okay, we'll cover that very briefly, but just kind of give you a flavor of who controlled the world at that time, and certainly was Rome. A little bit later on today, we will start chapter 11. We'll talk about some terminology, things like that, and then next week we'll jump into the Republic. And then it may take 2 more weeks, then we'll talk about the empire, and then we will get to the box of chocolates that I talk about in the book. If you've seen the book, what Forrest Gump said, life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. Well, that's what chapter 12 through 16 is. We'll talk about money and Jewish institutions and things like that. Okay, kind of a potpourri of things. So we'll get past the hard part in the next 3 weeks. We'll get past the history. It really is hard, and we'll get to more kind of a potpourri of different subjects. Okay, so stay tuned for that. All right, chapter 10, let's wrap up. Now, we destroyed Jerusalem last week. AD 70, Jerusalem fell, and we're going to destroy the rest of Judea this week, very quickly. Now, this was in AD 71 through 73. We had mop-up operations in Herodium, Machaerus, and Masada. We see the same place where the Romans had their base camp, essentially, was at Caesarea. Notice the map is not very busy, okay? Everything's pretty much conquered except for fortresses. They had already conquered all the towns, all the cities, Jerusalem being the main big city, okay? Now it's up to conquering the fortresses, Herodium, Machaerus, and Masada. All right, first up, Herodium, taken by Bassus, Lucius Bassus in AD 71, only briefly mentioned by Josephus. We know that Herod built a palace here when he was fighting the Jews, and he won against the Jews, and it was a place called Tekoa. You remember all this, right, from the previous history? Okay, maybe not. Used to be called Tekoa, and then he built a palace here at Herodium to celebrate his victory over the Jews. There's an upper palace, and then there's a lower palace here. And this is the upper palace, and upper Herodium, lower Herodium. It's the burial place of Herod the Great. We talked about this a couple of times. We saw, when we were in Israel in 2013, a special exhibit that showed where they'd put together the mausoleum of Herod the Great. They showed his sarcophagus. We've talked about the difference between a sarcophagus and an ossuary in previous classes. And they showed a marble bathtub that he had, which is pretty cool. Okay, that was in 2013 to 2014. I'm assuming that still exists in the Israel Museum, probably as a separate exhibit on Herod the Great, maybe. I don't know. Discovered in 2007. You know, some of the neat things about all this that I talk about, all this stuff is done in my lifetime. We talk about the uncovering of Gamla. It was done in my lifetime. The uncovering of the things at Masada was done in my lifetime. The finding of Herod's tomb was done in my lifetime. All these things were done in my lifetime. I'm 63 years old, almost 64 years old. That's kind of cool that all this stuff has been discovered fairly recently. Okay. Machaerus. So, Machaerus fell in 72 by Lucius Bassus also. It was originally built around 90 BC by Alexander Jannaeus. Remember him? Everybody remember Alexander Jannaeus? Okay, 90 BC, built by him. Located on the Dead Sea in modern-day Jordan. Okay, it's kind of across the Dead Sea from Masada. It's over in Jordan, whereas Masada is in the West Bank. All right, we'll talk about Masada in quite a detail later. It's where Siloam danced and John the Baptist was beheaded. We talked about that in detail under chapter 8. We talked about the Herodians. Okay. The Zealots gained control of the fortress in 66 AD, and like Herodium, it was taken by Bassus in 72, and he began building a siege ramp to take the fortress. If they hadn't surrendered, we may be talking today about the giant siege ramp that Bassus built to Machaerus instead of the giant siege ramp they built at Masada. But it turns out that Machaerus fell because the city gave up when a young guy named Eleazar, one of the young Jewish rebels of a fairly prestigious family, was captured, and he was about to be crucified. And the whole town loved this guy, apparently, and they said, we give up. We'll open the gates. Don't crucify Eleazar. Machaerus fell to the Romans because they opened the gates and gave up when Eleazar was about to get crucified. All right? That's Machaerus from above. That's Machaerus from afar over in Jordan today. Okay? Masada, the last Jewish holdout-ish, the last Jewish fortress holdout, okay? Originally built by Jonathan, as Josephus tells us, or perhaps Alexander Jannaeus. There's numismatic evidence that it was built by Alexander Jannaeus, coins that they found. It was enhanced greatly by Herod the Great in the teens BC. Herod, as we mentioned before, dug giant cisterns underground to capture water. So when the Jews held Masada, the zealots held Masada, they had no need of water. They had no need of food. Herod had supplied much provisions up there that the zealots were able to use. In fact, when we find about the fall of Masada, I'll tell you about it here in just a minute, they burned everything except the food supplies because they wanted the Romans to see that we had plenty of food. Okay? We had plenty of water, plenty of food. We didn't do all this I'm getting ready to tell you about. We didn't do all this because we were running out of food, like they did in Jerusalem. Remember, they were going to the sewers in Jerusalem. They were going to cow dung in Jerusalem. They were eating their shoes. They were eating their children. Okay? They had a food problem in Jerusalem, not Masada. Okay? Good zealots, question mark. When you watch a movie like The Dove Keepers, and there have been a whole bunch of movies on Masada, the zealots seem like pretty good folk, pretty decent folk, and they're just kind of an impossible situation. Josephus paints a little bit of a different picture here, okay? He says these zealots were known as Sicarii, okay? Perhaps where the name Judas Iscariot came from. He might have been a zealot. He might have been of this sect, this faction of the Sicarii, of the zealots, okay? They were known to carry these type of daggers, okay? Curved daggers for killing and stabbing people, okay? Josephus paints a very negative picture of them. He says they overran the neighboring country and killed 700 people who could not run away, being women and children of En-Gedi, which is a place close to Masada, which we passed by when we were there. They laid all the villages that were about the fortress waste and made the whole country desolate. He definitely paints a different picture of the zealots than we read about in the common literature of today. Okay? And I'm going to tell you the story of what happened there. Okay? First of all, Herod, remember he enhanced the place in the teens BC, and he left 800 of his friends and family there when he was running from the Parthians. Remember that story? Okay? And then he finally went to Cleopatra and then went to Rome. Rome declared him king of the Jews. He came back and started conquering places. Okay? So he transformed Masada into a giant, amazing fortress that you can go see today. 77 years after he died, it fell. It fell to the Romans. You can read about that starting at page 332 of the book. Now, some neat things. There's a Roman camp. I think I took this picture from above. I told you my camera battery ran out on Masada. But I think I snapped this picture before my battery ran out. And I snapped this picture below. You can see the snake path going up to Masada. I'm going to show you a picture in a minute of different angle of the snake path, how really complicated it looks. This is the northern palace that Herod built on Masada, right up here. I'll show you a better picture of that in a minute. We stood up here and looked down on the northern palace. Unfortunately, we were the tour group, and we were on the tour group's timeline, so we did not have time to take the stairs down to go to these lower tiers of the palace, unfortunately. This is how you get up. This is the recommended way to get up to Masada today. The only other ways are the snake path and maybe a couple of other helicopter, I guess, or whatever. This is Masada from above. From here, you can see the northern palace right here. That's the upper portion, tier 2, tier 3. Pretty amazing place that Herod built, okay? You can see the storehouses where they kept all the food. You can see the western palace of Herod, the casement wall going around the entire plateau, okay? You see the snake path, different view of the snake path. This is pretty cool. There were a lot of people, several people walking up the snake path when we were there. When I took a picture, you can't see them at all. The picture that I showed a minute ago actually had people in it. You can't see them at all. It's quite a path to get up there, not something that we were going to do, but it's something you can do if you're athletic and want to go do that and spend a half a day or more doing that kind of thing. I guess probably maybe a day, I don't know. But the tram thing, the little cable car, is the way to go, if you ask me. Okay. Over to the left here is the Dead Sea. It's not in the picture. About a mile away, and then and this is in the West Bank, by the way. And then about, I guess, 30 miles over that direction or so is the Mediterranean. All right. So this is what the Masada plateau looks like. Okay. Things in black are things from Herod the Great's time. And this is a chart we've seen before, back when we talked in chapter 8 about the things that Herod did. So everything in black is something that he did. The Watergate, the bathhouse, the three-tiered palace, the small bathhouse, the storerooms, etc. Things in red happened during the time of the Zealots in AD 66 when they took it over, all the way through AD 73 when it fell to the Romans. The Roman siege ramp, giant ramp. You saw how intimidating the plateau was? That's a big ramp that the Romans built to get up there. But no obstacle was too much for them to overcome to take Masada. Now, we'll talk about why they spent so much money and effort to take Masada here in a little bit. Okay? There are 11 lots found here, somewhere in this area here. I'm going to talk about what those 11 lots mean. Those ostraca they found. Okay? 3 zealot skeletons were found in the lower tiered palace. Many of the zealots were killed by each other here in Herod's Western Palace. We have some zealot quarters, ritual bath, those kind of things. Okay? So that's kind of the layout of what Masada looks like. Now, the Romans began their siege in AD 72 under Lucius Flavius Silva. Bassus, who had taken Machaerus and Herodium, had died by this point. Silva took over, okay, and become quite the famous guy. There's a lot of movies about him today, right? The Dove Keepers being one of them. He first built a circumvallation wall all around the entire plateau, 1,000 feet down, okay? This was like every other siege. You got to keep people out. You got to keep people in. Okay, and he set up camps all around. Yes, I showed you a picture of one of the camps a minute ago. He then started building this ramp. It's like the Romans always did. They always built a ramp to go bust into the city. That's burst into the city. They always did that. The difference between a ramp for Jotapata and Masada was the size of it. This ramp was 375 feet tall. That's a big ramp, 75 feet wide. That's a lot of rock that those Roman soldiers were having to move up there day after day until they finally were able to build up to the point where they could roll their siege machines up there and break into the wall. When the ramp was complete, the Romans broke through the wall, only to find another wall behind. The Zealots had taken some of the timbers from the Western Palace, other structures up there, and built a wall behind the wall that they broke into. But it didn't stop the Romans. They built this wooden wall, filled it with dirt, and the siege machine could not break through that. The dirt would just kind of settle and just kind of bounce off, whatever. And the Romans finally just said, we'll set fire to it, no big deal. And they set fire to it, and that only slowed the Romans down by a day. Okay? After the fire was out and the Romans broke through, the next day everyone was dead already. You know the story, right? Everybody probably knows the story of Masada. Everyone was dead. The Romans came in and said, who do we kill? We want to kill somebody. But there's nobody to kill. Well, except for 7 people. There were 7 people alive that were hiding. Let me tell you what happened. A man named Eleazar was in charge of Masada at the time. He was a zealot. You can read this, right? Okay. This is his speech. I actually thought about reading his speech to you because it's a pretty interesting, inspirational speech if you were trying to get people to kill themselves. Okay? Pretty inspirational speech. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that because Josephus, the translation that I have is from Whiston, I think, and it's like 300 years. He did it like in the 1800s or something, probably 300-year-old translation. And at one time or another, I thought, I need to go through Josephus and just do a paraphrase of Josephus because to find some easier-to-read version of what I had to deal with and going through all this stuff. So I decided not to read his speech. And I went online just for fun. I said, I wonder if there's anybody that's ever done that, kind of what I've been talking about doing. And I found out just this year, someone has published a paraphrase of Josephus. It's going to be a 3-volume work, and he's already put out volumes 1 and 2, which I ordered last night, not in time to read Eleazar's speech, but I'll have that by next week, volumes 1 and 2, and then volume 3. He's only doing Antiquities of the Jews so far. I don't know if he'll do Wars of the Jews or not. So actually this speech will not be in the ones that I ordered, unfortunately. But let me sum up the speech for you, okay? He said to the people at Masada, he said, We resolved never to be servants to the Romans. We were the first that revolted from them, and we were the last to fight against them. It is still in our power to die bravely and in a state of freedom. He said, the Romans are coming, and there's nothing we can do. They're going to take the fortress within a day. They set fires to the wall that we built. Once it collapses, once it burns up, they're coming in. We can't stop them. It will be better to die with our friends. And this is something that Romans cannot stop. Our wives should die before the Romans abuse them, and our children should die before they have to experience slavery. Got some good points there. Then we, the men, should mutually kill each other. First, let us burn the bodies, the fortress, and all our belongings to keep the Romans from pillaging our dead bodies. Let us not burn the food in the storerooms, to prove to the Romans that we did not commit suicide because of lack of food, as many had done in Jerusalem and other places when they besieged the places. Despite Eleazar's logic, to him there were many that were not convinced. Not sure I would be with just a speech. He chastised the more effeminate men for their wives and their families. He reminded them of how Rome treated their captives, torturing them on a rack, torturing them by burning them with fire and beatings, taking them to arenas to be eaten by wild animals. He said, life is not going to be good if the Romans take you. If you live through the siege itself, it's not going to be good if you're taken captive. He said, but for abuses and slavery in the sight of our wives led away after an ignominious manner with their children, these are not such evils as are natural and necessary among men. Miserable will then be the young men who will be strong enough in their bodies to sustain many torments. Miserable also will be those of elder years who will not be able to bear those calamities which young men might sustain. One man will be obliged to hear the voice of his son implore help of his father when his hands are bound. But certainly our hands are still at liberty today, not tomorrow, and have a sword in them. Let them then be subservient to us in our glorious design. Let us die before we become slaves under our enemies. Let us leave them an example which shall at once cause their astonishment at our death and their admiration of our hardiness therein. That is a summation of his speech, of a multi-page speech that Josephus recounts for us. Good speech. His zealots almost rushed to be the first to kill their wives and kids, to prove to the others they were up to the task. The husbands tenderly embraced their wives and took their children into their arms and gave the longest parting kisses to them with tears in their eyes. Yet at the same time did they complete, you know what that means, what they had resolved on, and killed their entire families. They then chose 10 men by lot to kill all the remaining men. All the men laid down by their wives and children and bare their necks to be killed. These 10 men went around and killed all the other men up there. The last man standing was to set everything on fire and then kill the other 9 and then kill himself. He was the loser of the lots. 960 people perished this way. If you look in literature, most say 960. The Josephus is a little unclear if it's 960 or 953. But 7 people survived, 2 women and 5 children, who hid themselves from all this carnage and lived to tell the Romans and Josephus about it, so Josephus could write about it today, for us today. Okay? Interestingly enough, back in 1963, in my lifetime, I was 2-3 years old, they found 11 ostraca, written with one hand by one man with 11 different names. One of those, Ben Yair. Eleazar, Ben Yair, the leader of the rebels. These 10 ostraca were probably the men that ended up killing all the other men up on Masada. Okay. Watch some of the movies. Go home tonight and rent you a movie, Dove Keepers or whatever. Masada's a pretty gruesome story. But the IDF The Israeli Defense Forces go up there every year. That's where they do their training, their final training, and say, never again. Never again. And the IDF means it, right? The IDF is the most amazing fighting force on earth, I think. The way they've kept, from the very day they were founded, Israel was founded, they've repelled Arab armies ever since. Now, my camera ran out of battery. I could not take this picture. This is one picture I could not find on the internet. It's one of the 3 pictures in the book that I had to pay for. I had the license from a guy. Why did the Romans spend so much effort and time to take Masada? Well, security. Masada likely would have remained launching point for further attacks against Rome, so they needed to take them out. If other provinces have seen the Jews revolt and get away with it, then they might revolt as well. Can't have that. Prestige. The taking of Masada was a monumental feat. You saw the pictures. You saw the ramp. Actually, I didn't show you the ramp in that one picture. It's fallen out to the world that no fortress or people could withstand the might of Rome. Let's go back and look at the ramp. There's the ramp. Right there. Can you see it? Now, it's on the other side. When you go visit Masada today, you usually end up on this side. Okay, this is where the visitor center is, and the museum down at the base of Masada. Okay, and then you take the tram up, or the snake path up, or whatever. So the ramp is on the opposite side over here. It's about 1,500 feet above the Dead Sea. 1,900 feet wide, about 650 feet wide. Pretty big chunk of land up there. But that's a pretty big ramp going up there. All right, so back to our regularly scheduled story. Completion. Masada was the last holdout of the Jewish rebels. Many zealots who had fought in other battles against Rome had fled there, like they'd fled to Jerusalem. Remember, all the cities fell, Gadara, Gamla, Gishala, whatever, they all fled to Jerusalem. And that's where a lot of the zealots ended up. When Jerusalem fell and all these other cities fell, a lot of them fled to Masada. So that's where kind of the last holdout was. Rome could not claim total defeat of the Jews in Judea until they took Masada. So they did. Okay? The end of the Jewish state. Once again, Jews are fleeing. A lot of them went to Alexandria. Some of the zealots were causing problems in Alexandria. And the Jews said, that's enough of this. That's just enough. And the moderate Jews actually took the rebels, took the zealots and captured them and took them to Rome and said, we're done with this. Deal with them the way you want to deal with them. The Romans, for their part, ended up tearing down the Jewish temple in Leontopolis. Now remember, back in the days of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the horn, the little horn of Daniel chapter 8, remember him? You got to remember Antiochus IV Epiphanes, okay? He deposed Onias III, who was the high priest, and he put in Jason, Onias' Heleniah's brother. When he did that, Onias IV, the son of Onias III, fled to Egypt and built a temple in Egypt, and under the local authorities there, under the Ptolemies there. Okay, so the Romans finally tore that down, also in 73, 74, sometime around there. The Romans built several structures. We talked about this last week. Related to the fall of Judea, the ironically named Temple of Peace, or Forum of Vespasian, in AD 75, which housed the candlestick. This is the candlestick blow up of the frieze inside the Arch of Titus, with them carrying off the candlestick and the other implements of the temple. So the candlestick was housed in the Forum of Vespasian. They built the Flavian Amphitheater, or the Colosseum, from that. They built the Arch of Titus, which I showed you last week. Okay. Now, a couple of interesting points here, and I put down here, you say tomato, I say tomato. A Colosseum is just a Colosseum. Colosseum. The Colosseum is the Colosseum. Okay. So when you want to write about a Colosseum in L.A., which is what this one is, you write it with an I, C-O-L-I. If you want to write the Colosseum in Rome, you see C-O-L-O. Okay. Another point. Another interesting point is, notice that the candlestick they took out of the temple has 7 branches, right? This is a reconstruction of the candlestick that sits outside the Temple Mount in Jerusalem today. Okay, you can go up to it, and it's in a big glass thing because it's gold, I don't know if it's solid gold or not, but it's got a lot of gold in it, okay? It's in a big glass enclosure, but you can go up and see that today. And I talked about the Holy Temple Visitor Center, I think, in the past. Maybe... or maybe I'm definitely going to talk about that later. The Jews have pre-built all these implements to go back in the temple. I mean, they're hoping a temple gets built back on the Temple Mount someday, right? The Dome of the Rock is going to go away, and the Jews are going to build a new temple, and they're ready to move in. They've got their menorah ready to go. They've got the table of showbread ready to go. They've got the Ark of the Covenant ready to go. They've got all that stuff ready. The priest garments are ready to go. Yep. ready to move in when they build the temple back on the Temple Mount. Well, this is the 7-branch menorah that they're going to take in the temple when they say it's going to be rebuilt. Okay, when you go to a Jewish family today and they're celebrating Hanukkah, Hanukkah being the only feast of the Jews rooted in intertestament times. Okay, when they're and we'll talk about that in a few weeks. When they're celebrating Hanukkah, they do not celebrate Hanukkah with a 7-branch menorah. They celebrate Hanukkah with a 9-branch menorah. And I didn't know this till last night, or not before. I was researching for the class. I didn't know, but the Talmud actually prohibits Jews from lighting a 7-branch menorah, because that's a temple implement, right? They are only to light a 9-branch menorah. And I went and started looking at all, you go on Google Images and look at all the images. I looked at all the images and I didn't find but like 1 or 2 7-branch menorahs that were lit. But I found lots of 9-branch menorahs that were lit. Celebrating the 8 days of Hanukkah, when the oil lasted 8 days instead of just 1. We'll talk about that when the time comes. Not yet, a couple of weeks. Okay? You say tomato, I say tomato. And that, my friends, is chapter 10. First of all, let's do some housekeeping. And I was reminded of this when I was looking at my errata the other day. But anyway, don't forget about my YouTube channel. If you ever want to see, what did he say? I can't believe he said that. You can go and check it out. And if I said something really stupid, you won't be able to see it because Kenny takes all my stupid things out. Sometimes these 45-minute classes go down to like 2 or 3 minutes. But don't forget the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@DennySism. Don't forget the errata on my website, okay? I went and looked at the errata on my website, and I had a mistake on there. I needed an errata for my errata. I had put in there where Syria is not mentioned, the word Syria is not mentioned in the Old Testament. I said, that's not right. What I meant to say was Syria is not mentioned in the original Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament. Okay, you will not find the word Syria. That word Syria came into common use with the translation of the Septuagint during the intertestament times. Okay, Syria was not an Old Testament word, not an Old Testament Hebrew word. It was brought into common use with the Septuagint. Okay, and we see it in several extra canonical works like the Maccabees and other things like that. So anyway, that was an error in my errata, which is not really supposed to happen that way. So my errata has an errata now, so go check that out, okay? I haven't put all the errors off as I'm going through the class and rereading the book and stuff. I'm finding more errors, some punctuation, things like that. I'm not putting those in the errata, but things that I find at the end, by the time I'm done with class, I will go update the errata one more time with things that I found. Kenny's pointed out a couple of things in the book, and some others of you have too, okay? Also, Kenny and I are going to be doing a new website coming at the end of the year, I think. I bought a domain called BibleCalculators.com. I was surprised that domain was still available. So I thought, cool, I'll grab it. So we are going to start out by copying over all the calculators that are on my Testament Press website to BibleCalculators.com. We're going to do some changes. Kenny has agreed to help me out there because he is the guru. I'm just like, ooh. So we're going to make some changes to the calculators, make them better. I've got some ideas for how to do the money calculator a little bit different. The link calculator, I want to add in Roman links. What's a stadia? The calculator right now, the length calculator is just cubits, short cubits, or regular cubits, royal cubits to standard meters, feet, that kind of thing. Okay, so we're going to add a bunch of other units in there that people of the times would be used to. Okay, the Jewish days, months, years will convert over there. I'm not sure there's much to change about that. I hope to add several others like a volume calculator. I really want a Josephus book chapter verse to book paragraph converter. Probably no one on earth will use that except me, but I'm going to do it anyway. I don't think it'll take too much effort to do that. But I go and I read some piece of literature. It gives me a book paragraph reference, and I say, okay, I've got this reference over here. I want to go, but I got to convert that to a book chapter paragraph reference anyway. I have such problems. Woe is me. I want to do an enhanced distance between cities calculator. There's one in the book that's like how the bird flies. I want to do one actually paths. And Kenny gave me the idea. He'd put a chart in one of my presentations that showed going from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Remember that chart where you did along a road? So it's a lot further going along that road than it is as the bird flies. So I want to do some enhancements like that. Maybe we'll do an app later. I don't know. Don't forget that if you want a book, get it while this class is ongoing. I promise you the prices will increase afterwards. And how about a Christmas present for those loved ones of yours? If you have friends who are interested in history, have them come to church with you and have them come to class. Unfortunately, we're about to wrap up the history, but we'll get into more stuff based on the history here in the next few weeks. All right. Thank y'all. See you next week.